her role is being filled quite well with Pat. So thank you very much to the AV team. I also want to just take this opportunity to introduce Mika Leonida. She's our new Policy and Intergovernmental Affairs Coordinator, and she's in the hot seat supporting me today. So thank you so much. Thank you very much, Legislatures. Much respect, OCM. Legislature and Chief Swamisat, Laura Cassidy.
Squeakosium, and thank you, Dayton, for the feather. Yeah, I just want to also say thank you to the staff for making this together, and for the drums, the drummers, and the prayer, and Dayton for being our feather winner tonight. And for Chris, for his catering again tonight. He's been cooking for this past week for the family, and for now, I was just surprised to come in and see him still cooking. But we've been, it's been nice to have him nourishing all of us for this week. And I just want to also say my respects too for the loss we've had, and I think we've all been thinking it as we're sitting here, and we all look at the mantle and just think of the many times that the respected elder that we just lost, how he always brushed off our mantle and our feathers for us every year as we started off our term. And I just can't help it but think of that today, so I just thought I'd share that. I'll just keep mine short too, and just say Haichka, Haisetka.
OCM Haichka, thank you very much. I agree with you, Chief Swamisat, that in the comments that were around the table about how our elder really framed the government work that we're doing and the protocols that we're doing, and we would not be where we are in this journey without that wonderful guidance and wisdom and humor that helped us to start this work. Thank you very much, legislators, for your comments and your thoughts and working together. You're not Zamat, working together as one. For our next piece of business tonight, I would like to call upon Chief Swamisat, Legislature Cassidy, to speak about Bill 004-2026, the Government Organizations Amendments Act, and then she'll read the motion to introduce the bill. And then once she's done that, I'll ask for a seconder, and then we'll vote to have it tabled. Chief Swamisat.
Squeakosium, and thank you, Dayton, for the feather. Since our treaty came into effect, the Tsawwassen government has been guided by several foundational pieces of legislation, including the Constitution Act and the Government Organization Act. The Constitution Act outlines our nation's founding principles, establishes the objectives of the Tsawwassen government, and defines our governance structures. The Government Organization Act establishes the rules, procedures, and responsibilities and composition of the Tsawwassen government's elected offices. Together, these laws have supported many years of strong and successful self-governance. Since treaty, our member population has grown and our governing practices have evolved. The Constitution Act provides a formula for determining the maximum size of the Tsawwassen legislature, ensuring it remains proportionate to our member population. In 2025, our population reached 550, which allows for the addition of 1 seat to the legislature. The amendments before us today will help ensure that the Tsawwassen members are appropriately represented at the legislative table, contributing to the diverse perspectives that strengthen our decision-making. I look forward to the discussion of this bill among our legislators, and I will now read the motion to introduce it. Motion to introduce Bill 004-2026, the Government Organization Amendments Act. Whereas the Constitution Act establishes the formula for determining the maximum size of the Tsawwassen Legislature, permitting the addition of 1 seat for every 100 members beyond the initial 350 members to a maximum of 16 legislatures. Whereas in February 2025, Tsawwassen First Nations member population reached 550, permitting the addition of 1 additional seat and increasing the size of the legislature from 13 to 14 seats. Whereas it has been determined that any increase in the number of seats be the decision of the Tsawwassen Legislature and achieved through an amendment to the Section 5B of the Government Organization Act. Whereas the Tsawwassen government is committed to ensuring the continuation of effective representation of all Tsawwassen members to a supporting strong decision-making and dialogue within the legislature. Whereas the proposed amendments strengthen alignment within existing self-governing practices and Tsawwassen legislation, including the Elections Act. Therefore, be it moved that Bill 005-2026, the Government Organization Amendments Act, be introduced to the Tsawwassen Legislature's consideration, debate, and approval.
Hajka Chief Swamiset. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Legislature Tehuilam, Bryce Williams. Thank you, legislatures. The motion has now been passed to be tabled. I would like to now call upon Mary Childs, General Counsel, to give us a brief overview of Bill 004-2026. Mary? Oh, can you stop for a second? Thank you. See, she's doing her job. There we go. Excellent. I was just actually testing her. Okay, so we had a seconder. Okay, Legislature Kathy Tiesmelot, are you in favor or not of tabling this motion? In favor. Thank you. All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you, Legislature. This motion has been approved unanimously. Now, I would like to invite Mary Childs, Legal Counsel, to come up and do a brief presentation about this bill. Mary?
Hajka Squeakle and Hajka to the Feather Runner for the feather. Thank you, Hajka legislators, for the opportunity to talk to you about this bill. As you have heard from Chief's opening remarks, introducing the motion, the essence of this bill is to make certain changes to the Government Organization Amendments Act. And there are 2 things that this bill will do if it's passed. The first is to increase the size of the legislature by adding 1 more legislator position before the next election. And the second is to make some changes to the act that will align it with recent changes to the Elections Act. So I'll begin with talking about the legislature. As you probably know, the Constitution Act says that the Tsawwassen government can add 1 additional seat to the legislature for every 100 members after the initial 350, to a maximum of 16 seats. So that's what the Constitution Act says, but it's not automatic. It still requires an amendment to the Government Organization Act. The last increase was in 2015, when TFN's population reached 450. In early 2025, TFN's population reached 550. So under the Constitution, it's possible to add 1 more position for a legislature. So in early 2025, Executive Council directed staff to engage with members on this question. And so staff consulted with members, and following that engagement, Executive Council directed staff to prepare this bill to amend the Government Organization Act to increase the size of the legislature from 13 to 14 seats. So the objective here is to increase that to 14 elected positions, not including the chief. And if this bill passes, what will happen is that Section 5B of the Government Organization Act will be deleted. That's the section that talks about 13 legislators, and it will be replaced with 14 legislators elected in accordance with the Elections Act 2025. So that's the first change, and that's the most important, significant change in the bill. And I should mention that it does not change the size of Executive Council. The Constitution says that there must be a minimum of 4 legislators who are appointed to Executive Council, but it doesn't provide for any kind of increase at a particular occasion linked to the number of members or anything else. So there were some questions raised about this during the engagement, but any attempt to change the size of Executive Council would require some extensive community engagement, and that is something that can't be done thoroughly before the next election, so it would have to happen after this coming election. So the rest of the provisions in this bill are intended to tidy up some discrepancies that arise from the changes to the election legislation, and also a couple of provisions that are not necessary. So they're kind of housekeeping type amendments. So traditionally or historically in TFN laws, the Election Act and the Government Organization Act referred to each other. And in 2025, when the Election Act was amended, references to the Government Organization Act were removed. They weren't necessary in the reworded legislation. But in the Government Organization Act, we still have some references to the old Election Act that's now been replaced by this legislature. So the recommended action here is to remove these anachronistic references from the Government Organization Act, because one of the challenges you have when you have 2 pieces of legislation referring to each other is that if one of them changes, that change may have implications for the other legislation, and then you kind of run into a problem sometimes of things not running exactly in lockstep. They're on kind of parallel tracks, but not at the same speed. So that's part of the purpose of these changes. Also, a few amendments just to reflect some updated language, and also to repeal a couple of provisions that are no longer needed. So I'll just take you through those. So the ones that are going to specifically come to your attention here are first repealing Section 15, which is the Certificate of Qualifications. We have a requirement in the Elections Act that when somebody runs for elected office, they have to certify that they are qualified to do so, that they meet the requirements in the Elections Act. Now, the Government Organization Act has a provision that says theoretically, members of the legislature are required to recertify that every year, which really is unnecessary. It's kind of a waste of their time unless something has changed, and we have other provisions elsewhere in legislation that requires notification if there are any significant changes. So, and similarly, other governments don't do this. They don't require elected officials every year to certify that they're still qualified. So it makes sense to remove this because we have other ways to address any concerns. And it's really asking legislators to do something that is just unnecessary paperwork and not something done by other governments. The next provision is repealing Section 50 of the Government Organization Act. And Section 50 is a provision that really just applied at the time when treaty came into effect, because it simply says that the former TFN Band Council still had authority between the effective date and the first general election. Well, that general election happened many years ago, so we don't need that provision anymore, and it might as well come out. There also there have been minor sort of reviews to make sure that the same language was used across both pieces of legislation, and a few minor housekeeping amendments to reflect some updated language. I don't need to take you through those in detail at the moment. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about this bill.
Heichka, Mary, for your presentation. Thank you for all of that information. Reminder, legislators, that this is first reading, and the purpose of the first reading is to ask for clarification about the bill itself. Debate about the bill will happen during second reading. Are there any clarification questions with respect to this bill, legislators? Thank you, legislators. There will be a lot of opportunity during second reading to go through more detail of the questions that you might have. I would now like to refer the bill to Advisory Council for study and ask for a motion now to move the bill to second reading. I will now read this motion, and then I will ask for a mover and a seconder. A motion to move Bill 004-2026, the Government Organization Amendments Act, to second reading. Whereas the Tsawwassen Legislature has the authority under Section 512C of the Constitution Act to enact Tsawwassen laws, and whereas under the Legislature Rules and Procedures Manual, Section 23, each bill must receive 3 separate readings. Therefore, be it moved that Bill 004-2026, the Government Organization Amendments Act 2026, proceed to second reading. May I please have a mover? Moved by Legislator Taylor Baker. May I please have a seconder? Seconded by Legislator Tequilum, Bryce Williams. All Legislator Tiesmelot, Kathy Genge, are you in favor or not for this bill to move to second reading? Legislator Kathy?
I'm in favor.
Thank you so much, Legislator. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you, legislators. This motion has been approved unanimously. This bill has now been moved to second reading. Heichka, for all of your work on this. Thank you very much for staff for doing all of the work to get us to this point for that bill. Moving to our next item, the resolution to amend the legislator's stipend regulation. I would now ask Chief Swamisat, Legislature Chief Cassidy, to do a brief introduction and to provide some context for this resolution. Chief Cassidy will then read the resolution to table it for discussion.
Squeakosium, and thank you, Dayton, for the feather. As leaders of a growing modern treaty nation, our elected officials take on significant responsibility when they serve as members of the Tsawwassen Legislature. This commitment is recognized in part through the annual legislature stipend established under the Legislature Stipend Regulation. Earlier this year, Executive Council approved an increase to the legislature stipend to ensure that the compensation continues to match the scope of the legislature's roles and responsibilities. In accordance with the legislature stipend regulation, any changes to the stipend must be confirmed by a resolution of the Tsawwassen Legislature. Therefore, this resolution requests the confirmation of the approved stipend increase with the implementation to take effect at the beginning of the new legislative term following the 2026 general election. I will now read the resolution to amend the legislature stipend regulation. Resolution to amend the legislature stipend regulation, whereas under Section 4.1 of the legislature stipend regulation, Executive Council may change the stipend amount by amending Section 3.1 of the regulation by resolution of the Tsawwassen Legislature. Whereas in spring 2025, a mandated report on the comparative salaries recommended a modest increase to legislature stipends to maintain compensation at the 20th percentile of the Tsawwassen government's comparator group. Whereas the report found that the current legislature stipends were below the recommended compensation levels. Whereas the increased legislature stipend shall come into force following the 2026 general election at the commencement of the next legislature term. Whereas the Tsawwassen government recognizes that the hard work and the dedication of the current and future legislatures are a cornerstone of our strong self-governance and is committed to the empowerment and involvement of our members. Therefore, be it resolved that the Tsawwassen Legislature calls on Executive Council to amend Section 3.1 of the Legislature Stipend Regulation to increase the annual legislature stipend to $12,500.
Haichka Legislature Swamasat. May I have a seconder to table this resolution? Seconded by Legislature Taylor Baker. All right, and now what we're going to do is, now that we have a mover and a seconder and this resolution has been tabled, I'd now like to call upon Connor Hasegawa, the Manager of Policy and Intergovernmental Affairs, to present the resolution to amend the legislature stipend regulation. All right, Connor, we moved you from elections now to regulations.
I know, a bit all over the place.
There we go. Thank
Part
you.
of the fun of working here is the variety. So hello, everyone. Haichka Squeakle and Haichka Dayton, thank you for the feather. Tonight I'm going to be presenting on the amendments to the legislator stipend regulation. Yep, that's the word. I have terrible clicker luck, but we'll see. It did work tonight, so there we go. So a little bit of background. So last year, staff received direction from leadership to take a look at several different issues that were related to remuneration for TFN's elected leaders, and that included Chief, EC, and the legislature. To ensure that the review of the remuneration was conducted in a way that is fair and transparent, an independent consulting firm called Eckler Limited was hired to produce an independent report. Based on the findings of that report, Executive Council approved amendments to the legislator stipend regulation. However, unlike most other regulations, this one can't be approved by EC alone. It also requires approval of the legislature under Section 4.1. So that is the purpose of the resolution being discussed tonight. So a little bit of information about what the report found. So the report that was produced by Eckler was informed by a few different data sources. So it took a look at some questionnaire responses from other First Nations, from other modern treaty governments, and how their officials are compensated, as well as looking at provincial remuneration at ministry and crown agency boards, and then their own proprietary database that they collect as the consultant of different compensation levels. And the research they found that TFN's elected official remuneration falls in the 60th percentile, so a little bit above the midway point when compared to similar organizations. And then based on this research, and as well as doing some market analysis, they recommended a modest increase to the salary amounts so that TFN salaries would be a little bit above average. So here's a quick look at what the recommended compensation was for the different positions and where the compensation level is following the 26-27 COLA adjustment. So for Chief, their recommendation was $144,200. Currently, the Chief is being compensated at $146,690, so about $2,500 higher than the recommendation. Same thing with Executive Council, so their recommended amount was slightly lower than what we're currently providing to Executive Council members. And then the only one that was below their recommendation was the legislature. So their recommendation was that legislators receive $12,250. Based on the legislator stipend and the COLA adjustments over the years, the current stipend is $11,993.98. So it's the only one that's below. So based on the idea that the chief and EC compensation is slightly higher than the recommended amount, the staff recommendation was to make the legislator stipend slightly higher than the recommended amount, and that's how the $12,500 number was reached. So it is consistent with the others. And so all this means for the regulation is that the legislator stipend regulation was amended by EC already. From all it was replacing $10,000 with $12,500. So that will be the new base amount. It will take effect for the next legislative term. So the new legislature that's elected following the 2026 election will receive this amount. And yeah, like I said, it's just a bit of a unique regulation in that it actually requires a resolution of the legislature to confirm the amount that's set by EC. So that's a very short presentation, and that's all.
Well, Heichka, Connor, thank you very much for that very informative presentation. Legislators, we're going to be voting on this resolution on Thursday at our next meeting. But are there any comments or questions that you might have that require clarification or a better understanding, or just some thoughtful remarks that you would like to share today? Well, we have Connor at the microphone and he has the feather. Legislature Kwiakwia, Andrea Jacobs.
Hitchka Squeakle CM, Hitchka Dayton for the feather. Will we be debating on this and discussing it more on Thursday as well?
No, this is our debate right now because it's a resolution. It's not a legislative amendment. What we'll be doing is we'll be voting on it on Thursday.
Hitchka Squeakle CM. Okay. Okay, in regards to the legislator stipend regulation, I understand that most of the discussion was around the stipend. Was there a discussion at all around giving or allowing a little bit more authority or information for legislators to be a part of, in addition to executive council duties, such as meetings or events being invited to, for example, maybe treaty celebrations, being a part of government? Sometimes I know as a legislator, I feel a little separate from what happens at the executive council table, and bridging that connection would really be helpful. Maybe that's set for a different discussion. I just wasn't sure if that was part of this. Heichka Squeakle Sam and Connor for your presentation.
Heichka, for your question, Legislature. Connor?
Thank you. So I'm just going to look over to confirm this, but yeah, it was just compensation was the only, yes, that was it. Very narrow in scope.
Yeah, Heichka, so much, but I think that if staff could take note of that, and perhaps then that could be raised at Executive Council, and maybe something more formalized could be put into the works through maybe another regulation or something of that nature. But we'll let staff take a look at that. Thank you for that comment, Legislator Kwathia. Legislature Sultanat, Loretta Williams.
Okay, Heichka for the feather and Heichka Squeakle, and the opportunity to, I'm going to limit myself to one question. Just clarification, so this is already passed through EC, so we're not voting on our own increases? Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay, Heichka.
Heichka, Legislature Sultanat, maybe we could just add a little clarification for the process that we have to undergo for voting on these things, and why we've selected the timing, and why these things happen in the manner that they happen. Just so that legislators are clear, it is unusual that this has to come to our table, but it has to come to somebody's table. So that's why there's sort of, if you can explain the double rationale, Heichka.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, so it is a bit of a different process. I don't remember the exact wording of the regulation, but it basically says, so it is a regulation, and because it's a regulation, it gets approved and amended by Executive Council alone. The regulation itself states that the legislators need to confirm the changes. So you are voting to confirm, you're introducing a resolution, approving a resolution that confirms the change that was made by Executive Council. I hope that makes sense. And I believe the reason it was done this way, it was determined that it would be more appropriate for legislators to have some say in what their compensation was, so that it couldn't just be changed without their permission. And that's why it's set up this way.
Heichka, Connor, in addition, perhaps you could also share a little bit about, the purpose of the external consultant and findings, the range of, so that the due diligence was shown that just not random numbers were picked, like Heichka.
Yeah, for sure. So part of I think the reason that we've used an external consultant as well is because they're, one, they have better access to data on what is an appropriate level of compensation for elected officials doing similar work as to yourselves. And then I think it's also to remove the potential of a conflict, the idea that EC or yourselves would arbitrarily change the amount, or that you would direct us as staff to come away and go and because we report to you as staff, there is a bit of a tension there. So by having an independent contractor go out, we can have an independent, unbiased look at what the compensation level is and should be, and make a recommendation based on that. So it's really to take the decision more out of, to make sure that your decision is informed by independent sources that aren't yourselves and not necessarily the people that are responsible and reporting to you directly.
Heichka, thank you. Loretta, did you have Legislator Saltonat, did you have a follow-up question? Thank you.
Okay, Heichka for the feather. Thank you for the clarification. I had to ask that. Just because in the news you hear about all these different other governments, doing things, and it comes to the press and everything else. I'm just thinking about Richmond and, with their gift cards that they give to people and came out to the public. But, they're under scrutiny. So that was the only reason why I asked. Okay, Heichka for the clarification.
Heichka, Legislature Halkamatia, Louise Om.
Heichka Squeako Sam and Heichka Dayton for the feather. Just to, not a question, but just clarification, the amount that legislators get, the stipend is, has COLA applied to it. So it's not a $2,500 amount that we're approving. It's only about just over $250 that we're approving today, and we're not giving it to ourselves because nobody can guarantee who's going to win the next election. It doesn't take an effect until the next election. This was explained to us at the Executive Council table because we felt uncomfortable about the conversation. So because unless somebody at this table knows for sure 100% they're going to be sitting at this table next, come fall, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable voting on this today. Heichka.
Heichka for those comments, Legislature Halkamatia. Any other questions or comments or questions for clarity? Legislature Palihuia, Don Williams.
Heichka Squeakle Sam, Heichka Dayton for the feather. And thanks, Connor, for your presentation. I appreciate the work going into this and the legalities behind it. I do recall, I think, previous term listening in, and you guys had done similar thing, bringing it to the table at the end of the term for the next election. And just not to go astray on this topic, but just a quick comment regarding Quackwas. I did bring it up before, like we have the land facing the sea, and we have the Executive Council kind of little updates on what they do each quarter. It'd be nice if we can have that for legislators, like not so much detail, but just a summary, and it shows, what they're doing in the community, what they're out and participating in and engaging in. Heichka.
Heichka, Legislature Palihuia. If staff can take note and pass that on to our communications team, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you for that suggestion. All right, I saw your eyebrows, Legislature Assaulted Nut. When your little eyebrows, I can see them over the screen. Would you like to have the feather?
Oh, son of a gun, hey? Okay, okay, thank you for the feather. And I just want to make a comment, you know, like, this is such an important topic. And I'm wondering if we're just in a discussion stage, but if we could get a round table, you know, get an idea what all the legislators are thinking and feeling. And they may, you know, just like to hear from them. Okay, Heichka.
Heichka Legislature Assaulted Nut, we are on the same drumbeat. I thought that after there was a lot of clarification questions that I would ask for a roundtable on Thursday before we voted, and then people could hear each other's opinions and let people digest what they heard tonight, and then we can offer a roundtable before everybody votes. So you and I are working together. OCM. All right, I'll offer another opportunity for any legislative questions before we move on to the next item. Any other points of clarification? Anything to make Connor in the hot seat a little hotter there? He seems very well prepared. All right, legislators, thank you very much, Connor, for your presentation. I really appreciate that. And legislators, if you have any other questions or points of clarification between now and Thursday when we have to vote on this resolution, please do reach out to staff by email, text, phone call, or in person, just so that you are prepared when it's time for you to vote. Heichka. The next item on our agenda is an introduction to a resolution on amendments to the treaty. I think that Chief Cassidy is speaking as much as I am tonight with all of these resolutions and legislation. I'd like to invite Chief Swamisat, Legislature Chief Cassidy, to give a brief introduction to provide some context for this resolution. Chief Cassidy will then read the resolution to table it for discussion, and at that point, when she's finished reading the resolution, she will be the mover and I'll ask for a seconder. And then we'll proceed with the same thing that we just finished. Chief?
Heichka Squeakle Sam and Heichka Dayton for the feather. Tonight I'm pleased to introduce the amendment to the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement at the First Amendment negotiated under TFN's periodic review. The purpose of the proposed amendment is to change the province of BC's treaty amendment process for our treaty. In the past, our treaty amendments face obstacles in the provincial legislature, including delays related to scheduling within the BC legislature calendars. This amendment seeks to resolve those challenges. While this is a technical change that you may not notice in your everyday lives, it paves the way to make future amendments easier. The amendment process is an important mechanism to ensure that our treaty evolves over time as a living agreement and continues to reflect our growth as a nation and our relationship with our treaty partners. Tsawwassen First Nation continues to demonstrate leadership in treaty implementation as the first modern treaty nation in British Columbia to undergo its periodic review and to successfully negotiate an amendment under that process. This accomplishment, I think, we can take in pride. I will now read the resolution to give consent to the amendments to the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement. Resolution to give consent to amendments to the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement. Whereas the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement provides for its amendment with the consent of Canada, British Columbia, and the Tsawwassen First Nation. And whereas the parties agreed to propose the amendments to the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement set out in the attached Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement Amending Agreement. Therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to the Clause 8 of Chapter 23 of the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement, the legislative members of the Tsawwassen government consent to the amendments to the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement set out in the Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement Amending Agreement. I don't know if I should say that, number 4. Okay, thank you. Heichka.
Heichka, Chief, for tabling this resolution. Do I have a seconder? Heichka, Legislature Halkamatia, Louise Alm seconds it. Thank you very much. Now, this brings us to the presentation to give us some more details about this resolution. I'd now like to invite Twyla Smith, Director of Strategic Initiatives, to present this. As you may recall, Twyla and her team have been doing engagement over an extended period of time, gathering up this input, gathering our feedback from our members and our legislature and executive council to finally come to the compilation of what we were going to be presenting to our treaty partners. And so this is the work that she's going to be sharing. Twyla?
Heichka Squeakle and Heichka to the Feather Runner as well. I think this is probably my 10th or 12th session presenting to you all, and it still makes me nervous every time. So tonight I'm presenting an update on our periodic review work, as well as a bit more detail about the specific resolution that you'll be looking at in this session. So as the Squeakle mentioned, TFN continues to be a leader in self-government. This is the first periodic review of a modern treaty in BC, which means we are the first to walk this path, and we're helping to define how the process works as we're doing it. So sometimes we say we're building the plane as we're flying it. But at its core, the periodic review is an opportunity to update and modernize the treaty. So we're really focused on 2 types of amendments. One is updates that align with changes in provincial and federal policy. So this is where we see improvements in newer agreements that other nations have been working on for the last 15 or so years, as well as changes that reflect Tsawwassen-specific experiences, so things that we're not seeing in other agreements or advocacy from other nations, but are important to this nation. I think I'll breeze through the background a bit because I know you've all heard me talk about it a number of times now. But yes, it's hard to believe we've already been working on this project for more than 2 years, and I first presented to this table about the review in the fall of 2023. So although the process is slow, we do have momentum. We meet almost bi-weekly, and we're moving along. Since the fall of 2025, we've been working on negotiating the first amending agreements, and I'm very pleased to be presenting the first official proposed treaty amendment tonight. So just another reminder, we are working on amendments in 3 phases, and we're still in phase 1. So phase 1 is items where BC and Canada already had approval, or what we call negotiation mandates. And we've decided to actually split phase 1 into 2 amending agreements, number 4 and number 5. So in this session, we are asking Legislature to consider amending agreement number 4, and number 5. We're still buttoning up some of the legal language, and that'll come for potentially, if there's a session in the fall, we might be ready then, or it would be in spring next year. And I do expect phases 2 and 3 will continue throughout the next term. We still have a couple of years of work on this project. Okay, so now I will move on to talk about the resolution that's on the table for this session. So the change to the treaty that we're asking you to consider is a change to BC's consent process. So when I say consent process, that is the term that we use for final approval of treaty changes. So for TFN, the consent process is through the TFN legislature. That's what we're doing right now. We're asking your consent to change the treaty. So if this table approves, then BC and Canada will also need to go through their consent processes to finalize the change. The current language says for BC to do that consent process, BC will give consent to an amendment to this agreement by resolution of the Legislative Assembly. So much like TFN, it's their legislature that provides that consent. What the proposed change is just the end of that sentence. So BC will give consent to an amendment by order of the Lieutenant Governor and Council. And lieutenant government and council is just a fancy way of saying their cabinet. So for that would be the premier and their ministers. So what does that mean? It means that BC can approve treaty amendments to the Tsawwassen Final Agreement at the cabinet level rather than the full legislature. It aligns BC's process with Canada's. So Canada currently approves not in the parliament, but at their cabinet level. And it makes treaty amendments less political. So for example, when we amended the treaty to bring back the tax exemption, Councillor Cross actually had to go in person and speak in the BC legislature and advocate for that change. This would remove that process and take some of the politics out of it. So just to clarify, overall, staff are recommending this change because it will streamline future amendments. So we would no longer have to get into the BC legislative calendar, which sometimes fills up and things get pushed. We don't have to worry about opposition parties making a big stink about it. It would be getting a decision made by the governing party that we're working with negotiating. So we see it as a really to ease the future amendments. And just for clarity, this doesn't do anything to TFN's approval process. That remains the same. It's the TFN legislature, this table, that holds the responsibility and authority for consent to changes. So for the rest of the presentation, it's just an update. So what I'm going to talk about next is not on the table for voting on Thursday. It's just that piece that you're voting on Thursday that I just talked about. The rest here is just an update for you of what's coming next. So the second half of phase 1 is amending agreement number 5. And we really, really wanted to have this ready for you this summer, but we just weren't able to get all the approvals with our partners. So there are 5 additional areas where we're working towards amendments. The first is changes to the general provisions and preamble sections of the treaty. This is what's known as the recognition and predictability language, so recognition of rights. So it removes the modification of rights and final settlement language and clarifies that rights are recognized and exercised as set out in the treaty. So right now it says rights are extinguished and modified to what's described in the treaty. With this change, it would acknowledge that no rights have been modified or extinguished, but you agree to exercise your rights as set out in the treaty. And also emphasizes that the treaty is a living agreement and setting out ways that it can change. So really just making sure that your rights are not stuck in time and creating the expectation that the treaty will evolve over time. This language in particular is the result of years of advocacy from other First Nations who wanted to pursue treaty but did not like the way that rights were recognized in the existing treaties. So after deep policy and legal review, we believe that the new language is more respectful and could have benefits for TFN in the future as well. Second proposed change is where the treaty uses the English spelling of Hunkaminam. So we'll change it to the traditional spelling to be more respectful of Tsawwassen culture and building on TFN's work to reclaim the language. Then in the preamble, we're looking at adding a clause related to TFN's aspirations for stewardship. So this would include stewardship as a principle to guide the treaty implementation among the treaty partners. So the preamble part is not legally binding, but it does guide the parties in implementation, and we think that stewardship was something we just heard so much from the community always. And so this is one way that we're looking to strengthen those stewardship aspirations in the treaty. We'll see more changes in future phases related to environmental assessments and things like that that get at stewardship as well, but this was a really symbolic way that we could weave it into the early parts of the treaty. Then on child and family services, we're proposing to include new language that expands TFN's jurisdiction related to child and family services. So currently TFN can only provide those services to members on lands. These changes would expand the jurisdiction so TFN could provide child and family services to all Canadian members wherever they live in Canada. We still wouldn't have the ability within the US. And then we would also be able to provide services for siblings and parents who are married into Tsawwassen families but are not Tsawwassen members. Those changes would have to be incorporated in Tsawwassen law as well. So when the treaty changes, that wouldn't flip a switch on with that. But what our goal is to have the treaty enable the greatest amount of jurisdiction possible so that when the nation is ready to draw that down in law, it's there and available to you. And finally, we're looking at changes to the periodic renewal and what's called orderly process. So periodic review would change to periodic renewal, and this would happen every 10 years instead of 15. The new periodic renewal language is a bit more specific about the process and expected outcomes, including that amendments are an expected outcome, and just more respectful of the concept of a living agreement and relationship. And then, oh yeah, this part. So periodic renewal also tasks the parties with reviewing common objectives that are established together. So it gets kind of policy nerdy, but essentially it means that we would work with BC and Canada to develop some metrics of success. And every 10 years, we would actually look at those together and see how we're doing. And then changes would also include a new orderly process, which is kind of Canada's terminology for a process that would allow TFN to incorporate any new rights proven by other nations in the courts. There would be a process to discuss and have those incorporated them into the Tsawwassen Treaty. So just a really good hook should there be some developments in the courts that you can rely on. So when we get to bringing these changes through the legislature, we'll have the actual language of the treaty and that sort of thing, but just wanted to, get it out there that those are the things we're working on. And in terms of next step, first one here, that's what we're doing tonight, seeking your approval and ratification of number 4, amending agreement number 4. We're also very actively continuing to negotiate those 5 items that I just mentioned, getting very close to a language on that. BC and Canada will do their consent processes for number 4 in the fall. So once they approve those, from there on, the treaty amendments get a little bit easier. And then we're just looking to the fall, really getting going on phase 2 and 3 and looking at, I think we still had about 20 items on the list. So we'll have to do some work to prioritize and see where to start, what's most important, that type of thing. But really looking forward to diving into that a bit more. And hopefully we'll be able to bring number 5 through this table spring 2027 at the latest. I think that's all. Heichka, Haisepka, happy to answer any questions.
Heichka, Twyla, for your presentation and working to expand our jurisdiction in our treaty so that when we choose to draw down our legislation, we can do so when we want to. Thank you for laying out the roadmap for the future amendments and what work is yet to come. So today we're looking at Treaty Amendment number 4. Are there any questions from legislatures regarding this resolution? And we will be voting on it on Thursday, but today is a good time now to pose any questions, request any clarity, any curiosity, thoughts, or comments that you would like to have with respect to this presentation and resolution. Legislators? Legislator Kuyakuya, Andrea Jacobs.
Heichka, Squeakle Heichka Dayton for the Feather. Thank you for your presentation. It really helped. It's different reading it on paper and then listening to you explain it as I was jotting down some of my questions. I had a question if there's more amendments to come, and I can see that this process is very long. So just want to thank you and your team for that. I know that I don't see anything in here around taxation, but I know that was a big item for the community. I'm wondering when that was going to come down for, especially specifically to treaty lands, because I know that's a wish in our community, is to get those treaty lands up to the same as the Tsawwassen lands. So I'm sure it's in the works, and just want to thank you and your team for that. So Not a question. I think you answered it. So Haichka, Squeakle
Haichka, so much for those comments, Legislature Kuya. Do you want to touch on some of that work that we're doing with the Alliance of BC Modern Treaty Nations and those different tables? Twyla?
Haichka, sure, yes. Haichka. I was actually going to make a joke following Hulka Matia's comments about not being sure to be at this table, but I think I have some job security with the length of this work, so I will likely be here, but I don't want to be too presumptuous. But yes, in terms of the tax, honestly, that is the thing we hear most about from members. Every engagement, every time we're out there, that is something that comes up. I'll be frank, Canada so far has said, we don't think so. That's not something we want to do. And we just keep putting it at the top of our lists. And, you know, I did work with them to make sure it got brought to the federal finance minister just a couple of months ago. And so I know that it was put on his table. They couldn't tell me the outcome of those confidential conversations, but the staff at Canada are advocating for us on that point. So it's technically in phase 3, so they're not shutting the door. They're still keeping it on the list for us to continue talking about it. I say that it's one of the top priorities every chance I get because it is honestly the thing I hear about probably the most. I don't want to raise expectations that we can achieve it, but I can certainly promise you that we're continuing to try. I can't remember if there was anything else to answer.
No, that's wonderful, Twyla. Thank you so very, very much. I think that our perseverance and our exceptional ability for research and negotiations has proven with these amendments that the living agreement can be molded to support the best interests of our members and their well-being, as Legislature Kuya has mentioned, that's the voice out there. Legislators, any other questions or clarity? I see that Legislature Sultanat, Loretta Williams, and then Legislature Tuhilam.
Okay, thank you for the feather and a comment. Thanks for all your work. I got a question. Are you moving into your building? Because it's a lot of work you guys are doing. Okay, so one thing, like you said, you're going to take the part of the amending agreement was take the politics out of it. I thought that was a funny comment. Only because you can't take politics out of anything, right? So, seriously. Okay. In regards to the Child and Family Services, just I'm not going to read it all, but don't we do this already? Okay, Haichka.
Haichka, Legislature Twyla.
Haichka, we do not technically have the authority to provide services to non-members. So, for example, if there's a stepchild living on Tsawwassen lands in a Tsawwassen family, we don't have the authority through the treaty to provide services directly to them. If there were any cases, we should be working with MCFD in that case. I can't say what happens exactly on the ground, but from a legal and policy perspective, we don't currently have that authority.
Thank you, Twyla. However, our staff do support the process and advocate and work with families, Loretta, and that might be some of the work that you do see, but we don't have the jurisdiction for a lot of that other work. But we want the treaty amendment to show that if we want to draw down that jurisdiction, we can choose to do so. Haichka.
If I may add, Squeakle,
Please.
In those cases, we would likely be developing a coordination agreement with British Columbia if it was in BC. Because, for example, if a non-member child is living here on Tsawwassen lands with their family and we're providing services, and then say they move off of lands and now they're living with another part of their family, we don't want to abandon that child, right? So we need agreements in place with British Columbia to make sure there's a smooth transition of service and that child is still taken care of. So there is more kind of work that needs to happen on coordination agreements to enable that type of service provision, but we do want to make sure that we, again, have the ability to care for any child here in Tsawwassen Lands.
Hechka Twyla, Legislature Tehuilam, Rice Williams.
Hechka Dayton for the feather, Hechka Squeckle CM, and Hechka Twyla for your presentation. Just curious, what type of work has NISHKA done on any, have they done any periodic reviews, and what have we taken from the work that they've done? And yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Hechka Legislature Twyla.
Hechka. NISCA does not have a periodic review built into their treaty. I think that's something that the Tsawwassen saw, as they obviously would have looked at the NISCA treaty and actually added into your negotiations. But since the Tsawwassen treaty, all subsequent treaties have included it. So that's why we say it's the first in BC. There has been one review, periodic review of a treaty that took place in the Yukon. And we talked to Canada about how that worked, and they said that in that case, there was some very specific land-based conflicts that they were dealing with. So rather than using the process to really review their treaty in a comprehensive way, they used that process to work through some really specific to them issues. And so their sense was that there wasn't a lot that we could take from that process in terms of learnings. So in many ways, the work that we're doing on periodic review is quite similar to what the initial treaty negotiations were like. Similar kind of setup in terms of policy table and legal table, and working through issues in that way, kind of policy lens and legal lens, and put it together. And yeah, so although we say we're kind of carving out this path and it's new, we are relying on those processes for treaty negotiation that have been used and are tried and tested.
Hechka Legislature for your question, and thank you, Twyla. Any other questions, points of clarification with respect to this process for Treaty Amendment number 4 as a result of our treaty review process? Ooh. Going on my own spit. Thank you. All right, then. We will have an opportunity for additional questions on Thursday when we vote on it. And if you think of anything that comes to mind, please don't hesitate to reach out to Twyla if you have any questions or thoughts or would like additional information. We've covered our agenda, legislators. Thank you so very much, Hechka, for your hard work tonight. And this concludes our business on our first night back of our summer 2026 legislative session. I can say that we are halfway done. We got day 1 done, we got day 2 coming through. I want to also acknowledge Desiree Gurniak for doing that opening prayer, sharing the language with us, acknowledging Walapia, her Sitla, and I just see that language is flowing off of her tongue, and she started us off in such a good way. And our songbird, Connie Adams, who did the ceremonial procession, getting our heartbeats together, who will also be drumming us out. And for Dayton Jacobs Mayall, who's doing double duty today for us. He did a table blessing to make sure that we acknowledge the creatures and the plants that gave their lives for our nourishment, and for our cook, who cooked it up in such a yummy way so that we would be nourished that way. Thank you so much, Dayton. And also keeping us organized here, making sure that we waited our turn, Dayton. I think now that you are such a skilled feather runner that I feel sorry for any legislator or staff that speak out of turn, because I think you know how it works around here. So thank you so very, very much. I want to thank those that are here sitting with us in presence. Thank you for your support. We can feel your support as you're listening and supporting us as elders and advisory council members and Tsawwassen staff. Tawasin people, and to our staff that are here. Thank you to your families for sharing your time with us tonight. We really appreciate that. And if there are any guests that are watching us on live stream, thank you for being there as well. And to Kathy, thank you very much for participating with us in the online way. Thank you all for the privilege of being your Squeakquel tonight. I formally adjourn this meeting, and we will have a ceremonial procession with Connie drumming us out. Heichka, Exnet.